So the next session and the topic is surgical management of pediatric cataract, video-based learning. And for the next session, we have very respected Dr. Jagat Ram with us from Chandigarh. May I request Dr. Jagat Ram, sir, to please unmute himself and chair the next session. Over to you, Dr. Jagat Ram.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I will like to thank All India Ophthalmological Society for giving me this opportunity. We have instruction course on the surgical management of pediatric cataract. This is a video-based learning, and as far as I will give, I will like to continue with the introduction of the instruction course. Management of pediatric cataract is very challenging, particularly in neonates and infants. The issue of concern are growing eye and change in the axial length. Whether to implant IOL or not, IOL power calculation, surgical procedure, there are issues of long-term post-operative follow-up, visual rehabilitation, maintaining the clear visual axis, management of complications. And today I would like to introduce my team. We have a dedicated and competent faculty team from the Advanced Eye Center. We have with us Dr. Jaspreet Sukhija.
Nothing to see here, sir. Nothing to see here.
Yeah, Dr. Jaspreet is with us.
Open the PowerPoint. Please open the PowerPoint, sir.
Yeah, okay, no issue. Then Dr. Parul Chawla Gupta and Dr. Savleen Kaur. So we will show the video-based learning of the surgical management of cataract. And without any delay, I will invite Dr. Parul Chawla Gupta. She will be speaking on the basic step of pediatric cataract surgery for novice pediatric surgeons. Dr. Parul Chawla.
Thank you, sir. So this will be our instruction course for today. These are all the instructors under the mentorship of Professor Jagat Ram. So I'll be discussing the basic steps of pediatric cataract surgery for a novice pediatric surgeon. So congenital cataract has a worldwide prevalence of 4.24 per 10,000 people, with the largest prevalence found in Asia. It is one of the most important causes of treatable causes of childhood blindness. So what is the timing of cataract surgery? To prevent stimulus deprivation amblyopia, dense, visually significant bilateral congenital cataracts, surgery should be done around 6 to 8 weeks of age. And unilateral visually significant cataracts should be operated around 4 to 6 weeks of age. Increased rates of post-operative glaucoma is seen in the first 4 weeks of life. Therefore, it is advised not to operate these children in the first 4 weeks of life. So biometry and intraocular lens power calculation will be discussed subsequently. But just to have an overview, axial length can be measured using an immersion or a contact A scan or B scan ultrasonography. While using contact A scan values, the value with the maximum anterior chamber depth should be chosen to offset the inadvertent indentation of the cornea with the A scan probe. And keratometry values can be obtained also using an autokeratometer. Readings should be preferably taken without using an eye speculum, thereby avoiding the compression of the globe. And optical biometry with IOL master or LensStar can be carried out in older cooperative children. So intraocular lens power calculation in children, we should prefer a moderately hyperopic outcome to compensate for the myopic shift which is expected in children due to axial elongation of the globe. IOL can be implanted in eyes with an axial length of more than 17 mm and a corneal diameter of more than 10 mm. SRKT and Holiday 2 formula are the best give the best post-operative outcomes in pediatric eyes with axial length of less than 20 mm axial length. This is one of the study. In the infant aphakia treatment study in 2013 by Vandeveen et al., they have shown that SRKT and Holiday 1 have the least prediction error in infants. And in the study by Dahan et al., they have said that 20% undercorrection is proposed in children less than 2 years and 10% in children between 2 to 8 years of age. So now a recent study by Chang et al. In 2020 compared 8 formulae in less than 8 years old children. They found that SRKT was preferable in children less than 2 years of age or with axial length less than 21. And Barrett's and Hagees were preferred in children more than 2 years of age or axial length more than 21. This is one of the video which I'll be showing. This is a pediatric cataract surgery video in which we make the side ports and then we inject the trypan blue dye. This is a triplanar incision, main port incision. We start with the cystitome, the capsular axis, anterior capsular axis. Then we do the hydro procedures. Preferably cortical cleaving hydrodissection is preferred. Lens matter after being aspirated, we inject the bag with viscoelastic and insert the IOL. The IOL is dialed into position and the viscoelastic is aspirated. An air bubble is left at the end along with sutures. So to give more detail about these steps, a superior clear corneal triplanar incision of 2.8 to 2.8 mm is preferred in children. Why is a superior incision preferred? Why? Because the wound is protected by the upper eyelid from trauma. Scleral incisions 2 mm away from the limbus with conjunctival peritomy are rarely used these days unless operating for rigid PMML lenses. Smaller, tighter fitting incisions help in the better maintenance and stability of the anterior chamber. And we should always try to minimize the in and out times we take out the instrument out of the eye. 2 uniplanar 1 mm incisions approximately 180 degrees apart give a better maneuverability for the side ports. In order to address the small pupils, less than 4 mm pupils, they have higher complications and they can present with posterior synechiae as in uveitis, trauma, PFE or pupillary fibrosis. They can be dilated preoperatively with tropicamide or cyclopentolate, or intraoperative adrenaline or phenocaine can be used. Why anterior capsular axis is difficult in children? Why? Because it is thinner and elastic. It is a convex shaped lens. The lens tears, the capsule tears easily and runs peripherally. The AC is shallow. It's a smaller eye. The IOP is lower and there is less rigid sclera, which is easily collapsible, and there is a poor red reflex due to opacities. So anterior capsular axis can be done in various ways. We can use a cystitome with the Utrata forceps to do a curvilinear capsulotomy, or we can use a vitrector to do a vitrectorexis. So vitrectorexis is quick and simple, but it is used in fibrotic capsules. We can use 2 incision push-pull technique as given by Dr. Ken. We can use femtosecond laser-assisted capsulotomy. We can use plasma blade capsulotomy or precision pulse capsulotomy using Zepto, which has a Nititol ring attached to a suction cup. So initially the capsule is stained with trypan blue dye, which is 0.06%. This makes the capsule rigid and stiff. Then the anterior capsular axis is done with all these techniques. Manual CCC is the best. It has more strength and a smaller than IOL optic diameter should be preferred. So to prevent the AC shallowing and post-operative pupillary capture. So anterior capsular axis should be preferred as around to be 5 mm and posterior capsular axis as around 4 mm. Vitrectorexis, as I've already told you, it's a quick, simple technique and preferred for fibrotic capsules. A cohesive ophthalmic viscosurgical device should be preferred, a high molecular weight one. This is used to flatten the anterior capsule, keep the anterior capsule taut, and counter the effects of low scleral rigidity and vitreous upthrust. So what are the tips for anterior capsular axis? We should always try to pull centrally, use a cohesive OVD, and take frequent bites of the anterior capsule. Hydro procedures, multi-quadrant hydrodissection, at least in 3 quadrants should be done using a cannula mounted on a 2 cc disposable syringe filled with BSS. Lens matter aspiration can be done using a coaxial or a bimanual irrigation and aspiration handpiece. We should start from the periphery and swipe the lens matter clean. The IOL implantation should be done after filling the anterior chamber with high viscosity viscoelastic. We should push the leading haptic underneath the anterior capsule and then push the trailing haptic into the bag using a Sinskey hook. A single piece hydrophobic acrylic IOL is preferred for the in the bag placement. It leads to less posterior capsular opacification and less pigmentary deposits on the IOL. 3-piece can be used in case of inadvertent posterior capsular ruptures. Monofocal IOL are preferred in children and multifocal in children more than 5 years with bilateral cataract. The lens material, silicone material lenses are usually not preferred because they lead to silicone oil deposits. They lead to calcification in patients with asteroid hyalosis, and they lead to opacification with air fluid exchange. Hydrophilic acrylic IOLs lead to late opacifications and calcifications. They absorb the dyes like fluorescein, trypan blue, and also deposit the triamcinolone on them. The hydrophobic acrylic are the least likely to opacify, and PMMA are not foldable, so they require larger incision, but they are stable in the sulcus. Peripheral iridectomy should be preferred in patients who have aphakia or who have uveitic cataracts or traumatic cataracts, and it should always be done with a vitrector, and the bleed can be controlled with intracameral adrenaline or air or viscoelastic tamponade. Primary posterior capsulotomy and anterior vitrectomy are very important. PCO is the most frequent complication, and there is considerable risk of visual axis obscuration and amblyopia in children. In fact, 100% with an intact capsule. So we should cut the posterior capsule in a cut irrigation aspiration mode and cut the vitreous along with it. This is done in patients less than 8 years of old or mentally retarded children and those having nystagmus. Posterior capsular excess should be a little smaller than the anterior capsular excess, and posterior optic capture can be done for preventing the posterior capsular opacification. So it is very important to suture all the wounds with 10-0 nylon or 10-0 Vicryl because of low scleral rigidity in children, increased elasticity, and more vitreous upthrust, especially in children less than 2 years of age. This helps in preventing anterior chamber collapse. For children more than 2 years of age, a sutureless technique can be done, but with proper wound hydration. This decreases the surgical time and avoids suture-related complications. There is decreased need for repeated anesthesia for suture removal and decreased incident of endophthalmitis. Preservative-free moxifloxacin should be given intracamerally at the end of the surgery along with subconjunctival dexamethasone to decrease the intraoperative inflammation. Follow-up should be done. Post-operatively, topical corticosteroids should be given 6 to 8 times a day, and topical antibiotics, and topical cycloplegics for 2 weeks in uncomplicated cataract surgeries. Follow-up period should be done, in the follow-up period, glasses or contact lens should be given, and patching should be done for amblyopia management. This is another video. This is also a case of pediatric cataract with a zonular component along with the persistent pupillary membrane. Side ports were made. Viscoelastic was injected after staining the capsule. The main port was made. Capsulotomy started with a cystotome and completed with a Eutrata. Note the perfectly central capsulotomy in this case. Hydro procedures were done, at least in 3 quadrants. Then the bimanual irrigation aspiration was done, and IOL polishing was completed. Then a posterior capsulotomy was done using the same technique. Started with a cystotome and completed with a Eutrata forceps. Minimal anterior vitrectomy was done. The bag was inflated, and then a single piece acrylic foldable hydrophobic IOL was inserted in the bag and dialed into position. The viscoelastic was aspirated from behind the IOL, and the IOL was centered perfectly. The wounds were hydrated and air bubble was injected.
Thank
So-
you, Dr. Parul, for nice presentation. Very rightly, you said that you'd like to stain the anterior capsule with the trypan blue dye, because this topic is particularly for those who are novice, who are the beginner. That help us to identify and see the capsule, and it helps in better formation of the rexis.
Rexis.
How much size of the anterior rexis and posterior rexis you keep?
So we usually take the anterior capsular rexis a little bigger than the posterior capsular rexis. So anterior capsular rexis is around 5 mm and posterior capsular rexis is around 4 mm in size, 4 to 4.5. So that the IOL can easily slip into the bag.
Okay. I will request my colleague Dr. Jaspreet and Dr. Savleen. They will ask you question. If there is any question for the audience, that we will also take that question. Dr. Jaspreet.
Thank you, sir, for this opportunity. Yeah, I mean, it's they are very well shown by Dr. Parul, the steps which probably a beginner should take into account when starting pediatric cataract surgery. Especially the important things is the issues come during incisions also. You remember that when you are taking out the knives, I mean, it should not be a quick take out because you might just leak fluid. So it should be kind of a, you can say, a well-controlled insertion into the anterior chamber and when you're coming out. So those are important. Do not extend the incision. That's very important. Have a valved incision and fill the bag with the viscoelastic. The prerequisite for beginners is that they should have a good pupillary size. I mean, it should be a well-dilated pupil. So one should ensure that so that your surgery becomes much easier. The rexis, as you said, yes, it's different as compared to the adult rexis. I mean, you have to pull it centripetally because it's elastic. And posterior capsule is much more elastic as compared to the anterior elastic. So you have to be a little careful there as well, not taking it out. And yes, sizing is very important. And for a beginner, probably a 3-piece IOL would be better as compared to a single piece because probably then it can be maneuvered elsewhere in case they land up in problems. Suturing, very important. Suture all incisions.
In fact, the posterior capsular rexis is much thinner as compared to the anterior capsular rexis. So initially beginners should do with a vitrector and the experienced surgeons should follow it up with a cystotome using a Utrata forceps.
It's safer to do maybe after implanting an IOL, probably you could do a vitrector rexis. So that could be, it's safer if the size is accurate, plus chances are less that you'll have a vitreous tag or maybe the IOL slipping down and all.
Slipping down.
Right, I'll just quickly jump in. We'll do one thing. If the time permits, we'll have a question and answer round at the end of the entire session. That will help us to go through all the speakers once. And if anyone is having any doubts, they can ask at the end. And maybe some other speaker can solve the doubts if someone is having at the time. So I would request if we can continue with the speakers and at the end we can have the question and answer round.
Actually, this is right, but actually some 1 or 2 question, because there is a 25-minute time, whereas we will have surplus time. So 1 or 2 question in the beginning, and rest we will keep in such a way that this will finish in time. So we will adjust 1 or 2 question at least after every talk, so that it is live, so that it is not monotonous.
Sure.
Dr. Savleen, you will like to ask some question?
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, sir, for the opportunity. Those were wonderful videos, Dr. Parul. I just wanted to just take your opinion. I think Dr. Jaspreet only answered it, that what is your choice of intraocular lens? For beginners, would you recommend a 3-piece or a single piece? But I think Dr. Jaspreet actually answered it. And what about vitrectomy? Do you tell them to do it after, would you advise to do it after intraocular lens implantation, or do it before and then put?
We'll advise the beginners to do the vitrectomy after the IOL implantation, because that will make the IOL in a better position. The IOL will be stable, and we are sure that since the IOL is stable, we can confidently go ahead with the vitrectorexis, posterior vitrectorexis.
Now, I think without any delay, I will request Dr. Savleen Kaur to speak on IOL power calculation. Actually, this IOL power calculation is such a subject that even if we discuss it for many hours, even then we may not reach any conclusion. because these eyes are growing eye, and particularly in the first year of life or in the first 6 months of life, and then in the first 2 year of life, it differ that how much what IOL power you implant, which this is extremely difficult thing, and we have a patient at present where children has gone a myopic shift, maybe 5 diopter, 6 diopter after their follow-up for 20 years or more than 20 years. So, and Dr. Savleen has a lot of experience in this field, and I will request you to speak on this IOL power calculation simplified.
Thank you so much, sir. Again, thank you for giving me this opportunity to present this topic. I don't know if I can do justice to this topic in 10 minutes, but I will try to simplify it. Intraocular lens implantation in children, we are discussing it because a pediatric eye is quite different from an adult eye in a way that we expect to have early refractive surprises, which are usually attributed to the inaccuracy in intraocular lens implantation bar calculation. And we expect to have late refractive surprises because of the refractive growth that sir just mentioned. The pediatric eye goes into a myopic shift, and hence we have to calculate the intraocular lens very precisely and as accurately as possible. These challenges are mainly because of three things: because of the axial length keratometry measurement, because of the IOL power calculation formula that we use, and then the myopic shift, which can be very unpredictable in some children and can be very different in some children. So just simplifying it, we begin with an axial length measurement. Now, axial length measurement in the office, as we do it in an adult, cannot be done in a young child because they will not cooperate. They will require anesthesia and they will not fixate and center their eye. This error will equate to almost 2.5 diopter per mm of error in the intraocular lens power. And this error will further increase to up to around 4 diopters also reportedly in short eyes, like the pediatric eyes, which we have axial length of around 19 or 20. So we can do it with the contact applanation method, or we can use the immersion scan. The applanation is more convenient, and but it has the factor of corneal compression, and the immersion is more accurate. On an average, if you measure it with the contact technique, you'll tend to measure a shorter axial length than the immersion technique. By and large, in most of our clinics, we do have children, we do axial length measurement in the office, in the outpatient department. There are inaccuracies in the axial length measurement because the child would be crying, will not be fixating, and you'll have to actually hold the child and put a paraclane or anesthetic and then try to take 3-4 readings and get an average idea of what the axial length is. This axial length can be again confirmed in the operating room, where you're fixing right in the center. You need a stable anesthesia. The eye should not be up rolling or down rolling. You don't use a speculum. You just wash the eye with saline so that you don't have dry eye. And you slightly put your probe in the center of the cornea without intending much. Now on the left, you can see that we are trying to compress the cornea, and I have purposely put the sound in this video because we need to see these readings on the oscilloscope. So always do axial length measurement on a machine where you have these oscilloscope reading the spike, so that you know where you are measuring and whether how accurate you can predict the axial length will be. Of course, corneal compression is more likely in these eyes because of the low scleral rigidity, and you do expect some errors, but you can minimize them by doing them carefully. Keratometry, the second thing, is again very difficult to do in the office. You are fraught with errors of lack of fixation and centration, and each error in keratometry would lead to an inaccuracy of around 1.3 diopters in the IOL power calculation. So we have the handheld keratometers, which in our center we like to use. The measurements are again taken without the speculum. You have to take the readings quickly because you don't want the cornea to dry and you want the Myers to be central. And of course, you can use saline to smoothen the corneal surface. You can do it in the office as well. I like to do a keratometry reading when the child is sleeping, or sometimes even with the bottle, or when the child is feeding. So you can take a keratometry reading, but if you're not sure, again, a reading under anesthesia will be more accurate. Again, you don't use a speculum, and then you wash the cornea and you take an average of 2-3 readings. If you are sure that the readings are within 0.5 diopter, you might want to not take another one, or you can take a sample, and this is how the keratometer gives you the reading in radii, and you can use standard conversion charts to convert it into a dioptric reading. So you have the exit length, you have the keratometry, you have older children where you can actually do the optical biometry for these measurements. They are reliable and more accurate and more reproducible, and they're contact free, so you will not have an observer dependence of the measurements in the optical method. Now this is where we are. We have the exit length in the keratometry, and then we are feeding it in the machine manually because we could not do it in the optical way. Now you have the measurements, and then the next question that you have in mind is what power calculation formula we use. So you see the screen, you have fed the values of exit length and keratometry, and here we are using the SRK-T formula, and we get the power of emmetropic IL power, and then we can deciding on what refractive target refraction do we keep, we can then decide the IL power. But these two things are also as difficult as the exit length and keratometry measurement, because which formula to use, there is no consensus as of now. We have a lot of regression formulas, theoretical formulas, and we don't know which one to use. There are a lot of studies initially beginning with using the Hoffer-Q formula because they thought it is a small eye, but then came the thought that a pediatric eye is not a small adult eye, so don't treat them as a small eye. We started using the further refined Holiday 1 and then 2 formulas. So at present, there is no formula which is made for the pediatric eye, but we prefer to use the SRK-T and the Holiday 2, which is the most universally and standard-wise available in studies. You have decided on the IL power calculation formula that you will use, but you still don't know how much target refraction you have to keep. So what do you want to have the refractive error immediately after surgery? And when the child grows, what refractive error would you like the child to have? The consensus is that we undercorrect, of course, because we expect the eye to grow and eye to grow towards myopia. So we want to keep the child a low hyperopic. And we want a refractive error that should not cause an amblyopia, particularly in the age group that we are doing the surgery. And we also want a very low refractive error in the childhood. At least that is our target. So how much do we undercorrect? Again, we began with a very high hyperopia as our aim, but we now see that there are a lot of factors which we should consider. Lower age of surgery, younger the patient, you more need to undercorrect them more. If you have a fellow eye which has cataract, you can aim for a higher refractive error also. But a monocular cataract, you don't want a high hyperopia because a dense amblyopia in that age group will also be difficult to treat. So Dahan was the one who gave us the most of the baseline standard readings that we have. For a novice surgeon, we can always begin by that. For children younger than 2 years, you undercorrect by 20%, and a child beyond 2 years, you undercorrect by 10%. We also have exit length values where you can directly choose the intraocular lens power in case you are not able to do the keratometry reading. There are other rules of 7 by Enyadi et al., and then rules of Crouch, which said that you aim for a moderate hyperopia. So what I think Dr. Jagatram and Dr. Jasprit, and what I think we have been learning in our institute is that we do target a residual hyperopia and we target a moderate hyperopia based on the normal growth pattern because it avoids myopia later. You don't want a very high hyperopia also because it will be amblyogenic and you require the hyperopia to be corrected by spectacles or contact lenses when you are operating. So you need to have a initial hyperopia which is low so that the compliance to spectacles and glasses is also there. So this myopic shift that we are talking about, we do plan and we measure the exit length, the keratometry, we apply a formula and we target a moderate hyperopia. We still see that a lot of children become myopic. This is because every eye behaves differently. In general, as the age progresses, if you do not have a cataract, there is an increase in exit length which causes the myopic shift, but it is counteracted by a flattening of lens in the cornea, and hence the overall refractive error in adulthood is emmetropia. But what happens in a child with cataract, this increase in exit length continues to cause myopia, but the lens is not there. So you do a cataract surgery and the cataract which is preventing the light from reaching the retina, the exit length might be a little longer. It causes a further increase in exit length if it is uncorrected. There is no counteracting factor, and so overall the refractive error is myopic. We did publish our own results because Western data is giving a very high rates of myopic shift, and we observed that the myopic shift that we see in our population was at 8-year follow-up in this study by Indian Journal of Ophthalmology, which is cited quite well, was around -1.5 diopter. So we believe there are some genetic factors also which are playing a role. Maybe that's why our population behaves a little differently, even in other complications like glaucoma, different from the Western world. So I think we should all frame our own methodologies for doing and for targeting our refractive errors, and then look at our outcomes, because they might be different in different children from different geographic regions. That's all I have for the presentation. I would like to acknowledge my mentor, Dr. Jaspreet, Dr. Jagatram, who has left a legacy for all of us to follow in pediatric cataract. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Savleen, for a very nice presentation. I fully agree with you that we target moderate hyperopia, because if we try to target more, means keep a residual +8, +9 like that, then these children, there are much more chances of their becoming amblyopic. If we keep just emetropic, that initially may be fine, but these children, they go for much more myopia. So we have to strike a balance. That is what I feel, and I agree with you. Any question from the panel? Dr. Jaspreet, you would like to ask some question?
Yeah, it's sir, you're right in saying that a compromise has to be reached between a targeted refraction versus the amblyopia therapy also. So it has to be, you have to basically strike a balance in between. So because everything is not just target refraction. In a child's eye, you don't know, supposing if you keep him in like 6 or 7 diopters hyperopic, there is a possibility in one child, it would be good for him, like he would be emetropic by the time he's 6-7 years, but maybe in another child, he might not be, we still be hyperopic over a time. Or maybe if you keep it like maybe a less hyperopia, like maybe +3, +4, he might turn out to be myopic, when in another child, that child might be emetropic. So it's variable. I mean, the you can say the surprises over a period of time are basically because of the eye growth. How it grows, I mean, it's unpredictable in really just every child. I mean, so I think you can say for considering a broad category, I mean, these undercorrections, what Dr. Savleen just mentioned, are fairly good because that is what we have seen over a period of years, how the eye grows. But yes, surprises are common, no doubt, and people are moving towards gradual, you can say, less undercorrection as were earlier, considering the myopic shift, and how there is some evidence that probably intraocular lens implantation would help in decreasing this surprisingly high myopic shift. So age of the child, unilaterality, all these things have to be considered while calculating the IOL power.
Dr. Parul, you would like to ask some question?
No, sir. It's just that the moderate hyperopia is the key, and the undercorrections of 20% and 10% need to be followed religiously. And I think that will lead to a good post-operative outcome and prevent excessive hyperopia or myopia presently or in the future.
Actually, we follow this, whatever what you are saying, we also follow that. But initially, sometime when we followed it initially, 20% reduction, sometime it may happen that we'll end up with much more hypermetropia. Particularly in younger children, there is much more problem, particularly in the first year of life or first 6 months of life. But older children, there is a less problem. So this is just in general that we strike a balance. And we keep target is moderate hyperopia. That is but there is no calculations like that we have to, by experience or by our calculation, we have to target that.
And in fact, sir, being with you and with our experience, we've noticed that even the Dahan's formula gives a very, very good outcome in infants, in very small children. So following that simple Dahan's rule, it gives very predictable outcomes, in fact.
That is fine. Initially, when we were not doing even keratometry and this axial length, then that time only axial length we were doing, because it is based both on axial length and otherwise. But nowadays, that give a very good guidelines. But nowadays we try to see different formulas, and no one single formula is very accurate.
Yes.
So
So which formula do you like to use for, would you recommend?
actually, whether you use SRK2 or SRKT, initially we were using SRK2 for a long time, and later on we shifted to SRKT. Now, but actually that what is most important is reduction, that how much reduction we make. So we try that we may not make less reduction and somewhere moderate reduction, so that there is no increase in the hyperopia. Residual hyperopia should not be much more. That is what I can say.
And in these children, I think, as Sabrina had rightly pointed out, you have to look at the oscillometer. That's very important. The children don't fixate actually. That's why your accuracy in older children is much more. They are fixating. You don't get an accurate biometry, the axial length. So we have to see those spikes there, so that you're sure probably that, okay, fine, this is the region probably where we are looking for the axial length.
Yeah, you are right. Dr. Savleen has shown very nicely those pictures where in the office or in the theater, we take keratometry. Keratometry taking is much better in the operation theater, because environment, as well as I think you can put the speculum, and of course, I think axial length many times or most of the time we take in the outpatient department.
So we
So
have
I
a
think
question. We have a question in the panel, because we were discussing myopic shift. Maybe so Dr. Jasprit, if you could answer. Somebody is asking that, do we use myatro for myopic shift post cataract surgery? What's your experience?
So, I mean, obviously, there's food for thought. I mean, people who are doing do try to get something out of it. We had tried probably a couple of years back. Patients are not lost to follow where they have gone. I don't know, but yes, I mean, no harm in trying, because as it's being used for myopia with your you can say the axial myopia. So I mean, you can use it here in the sense that even though you're removing the lens, so there is no accommodative lag or what, because you will need to give the near ad in these patients. Yes, how it works, the mechanism of using atropine, the mechanism of atropine is still not clear. But I mean, definitely, I mean, if you want, you can, as a probably something to think about, or you can just try giving in your patient, because at 0.01% is really a very safe dose. So you won't have any systemic side effects. And besides that, when your crystalline lens is out, you won't have any accommodation problems also with that. So probably you can give it maybe once or maybe twice a day, and we can see the results. So no doubt, I mean, there's a good question, and definitely we need more evidence before we can come out with answers.
Okay, I think then we can take a question at the end. Now I will invite Dr. Jasprit Sukhija. He will be speaking on intraocular lens implantation in children, when to place and where to place. I think this is extremely important topic, that when to place and when not to place. And if we have to place, where to place, whether to place, I mean, to what I understood, whether to place in the bag or in the sulcus, or whether to capture it. And this is what I think he is going to show. Dr. Jasprit, please.
Thank you, sir, for this interesting webinar, and always it's a good debate. So I would be I would be discussing some of the practical issues in children when we have to implant an IOL, whether we need to implant this in a child or whether we need to leave the child a phakic. And if we are implanting, where can we implant it, whether there is area in the bag, whether we need to put it in the sulcus or maybe behind the posterior capsule. So these are some of the points I would be discussing in my presentation. So the indications for IOL implantations in children. The first and foremost is if your axial length is more than or equal to 17 millimeters. So that's the most important part. So if you have a child with an axial length less than 16 millimeters, probably you can defer putting an IOL and leave the child aphakic until the child grows, the eyeball grows, and you have a reasonably good axial length where you can implant an IOL. The other thing to look out for is a corneal diameter. So now, even in these patients, some have microphthalmos, some have just microcornea. Probably, if you have a corneal diameter of less than 10 millimeters, you should defer putting an IOL, because what happens is that this diameter is a diameter related to the bag. So probably you won't have a good bag also. When you have a diameter of less than 10 millimeters, there's a high chance of secondary glaucoma as well. So the age, as the consensus in the literature is that IOL should be implanted in children more than 6 months of age. Now, this is a Western literature, remember. It's not Asian literature, it's not Indian literature. Things are different here. When children don't come for follow-up, you can't be just leaving the children aphakic. And even if you put them with contact lenses, there's a risk of, there's a problem of hygiene here. Yes, spectacles are heavy. If you leave them aphakic, that's an issue. They might not wear it. They have other issues like jack-in-the-box phenomena and those kind of aberrations, which might maybe over years later have issues. Children might have issues with their vision. So, I mean, it's Western literature versus Indian literature, and one has to, you can say, strike a balance between when you would like to place an IOL. Yes, there is no consensus on younger infants, and as I told you, demographics are very important. The practical rehabilitation options, we cannot have just contact lens for everybody. We need to have other options as well, and one of the options is just why not implant an IOL. So where to implant? You have just maybe 3 or 4 areas in the eye where you can implant this. Conventional pediatric cataract surgery is like when you do your anterior capsular excise and you remove the lens matter and implant the IOL in the back. So that is what has been done in the past. There have been few case reports and also studies now which have shown that posterior optic capture is a good option in these children with the pediatric cataract. There is also, you can also have an option of anterior optic capture also in selected cases. So both types can be performed. The important thing is that you usually would not leave your IOL in the sulcus. There's so much inflammatory component in a child. There's high risk of inflammation in those young eyes. So try not to put them in the sulcus because you can have, when you have inflammation, it can just lead out to a whole range of complication. And yes, there's a bag in the lens has been proposed in Europe, and a lot of work has been done on this, but unfortunately, it's a patented lens which is available there, and we don't have that in India. So we'll have to wait for that. So routine pediatric cataract surgery, what does it involve? So routine pediatric cataract surgery, as has been shown in our first talk, is like you basically stain the capsule and perform a anterior capsular excise, which should be adequately sized. And then you remove your lens matter. And after removing the lens matter, probably what you do is do a primary posterior capsulotomy. Now, this primary posterior capsulotomy should also be of adequate size, a good size. Don't make it so small that it leads to closure, and don't make it too large that probably the IOL implantation becomes difficult. So in such cases, when I say conventional pediatric cataract surgery, the IOL is implanted in the bag after doing an ACC and a PPC. So this is a triamcinolone which you injected to see the adequacy of vitrectomy. So vitreous is clear, and you implant the IOL in the bag. So sometimes you can do a primary posterior capsulotomy before IOL implantation, or you can do it after IOL implantation. But yes, this is the, you can say, the commonest way is to implant the IOL in the bag. So it's stable there. And what literature shows is that has good results, but yes, visual opacification rates have been shown to be high as 20 to 40%. In some series, you could implant a single piece IOL or you could implant a 3-piece IOL. Sorry. So this is so that was IOL implantation in the bag. Now the modifications which have been talked of in the literature are in the form of anecdotal case reports or maybe a short series or so of maybe 4 or 5 patients. But yes, in all those patients, they did anterior vitrectomy and then did a posterior optic capture. So this is what I'm going to talk about is posterior optic capture, where you have an optic which goes behind the posterior capsule and the haptics are in the bag. So this is done without an anterior vitrectomy. So this was a randomized study which we did, and yes, we found that the results are very gratifying, and the inflammation was much less as compared to the eye where we did implantation in the bag. So these are bilateral cataracts. So that bias of you can say the child was removed. So you had 2 eyes of the same child. In one we did posterior optic capture, and in the other we did in the bag implantation. So just to show you one of the patients, what the posterior optic capture means is, so there, I mean, you could do it just in any patient. The advantages are that yes, you don't have to have a nice anterior capsule, or you can say a good size posterior capsule, even if the size varies. I mean, because the IOL is not going to go in the bag, the capsule size does not really matter. Yes, it should not be just too peripheral, or it should not be too small. But yes, keeping it maybe 5.5 or 4 or maybe 6 millimeters doesn't make a difference. So you just dilating the patient here using the intracameral dilator, and once it's done, the anterior axis was done, and then we are removing the lens matter. So the lens matter has to be removed gently in these cases. We don't, because it's quite sticky to the capsule, and we don't want just pulling out the bag or maybe causing a traction on that. So once we've done this, then what we do is a posterior rhexis. So this posterior rhexis is important. The size has to be a little larger as compared to a normal rhexis, what you would do. And yes, in such cases, you can only implant a 3-piece IOL when you want to perform a capture. So the IOL in the bag, now what we are going to do is nudge a part of it, the optic, behind the posterior capsule. So first you implant it in the bag, then the optic goes behind the posterior capsule. The haptics are in the bag, mind it. The haptics are not in the sulcus. So here you can see an oblong opening, which signifies that it's been captured very well. It's a locked IOL. It won't move anywhere. Decentration won't be there. And the other thing is both the bag, the anterior and posterior capsule, are going to fuse because there is no optic inside the capsule. It is just the thin haptics, which doesn't leave a space for any proliferation. So this is just to show you some of the results what we have when we implanted the IOL in the bag in one eye, and in the and we performed a posterior optic capture in the other eye. So just a serial follow-up. This was published in the Indian Journal of Ophthalmology. So at 3 months, they look all good. I mean, and when you follow them for a year, you have this proliferation in the bag, which is trying. You can see some cells coming into the center as well. All these things. Whereas in the other eye, it's like a Sommering ring which has formed, and there is just no proliferation outside because it's all a sealed bag. So coming to anterior optic capture, that was posterior optic capture. Now what we can do is sometimes we can have the optic in the bag and the haptics in the sulcus. Now these are selected cases. Selected cases means especially when you have like big eyes, you have maybe anterior megaophthalmos, or you have children with buophthalmos. So I'll be just showing this small video here, where you have a child who's had buophthalmos, he had corneal opacity, he has a corneal graft done here, a beautifully done corneal graft, and has a cataract. So we need to now remove the cataract so that he has regained some kind of a vision. And the ports have to be made as you are made in any conventional pediatric cataract surgery with the 15 degrees knife. You made it. Stain the anterior capsule. That's very important because this is a big eye. The chances are that sometimes it might just you can say go to the periphery, I mean escape to the periphery. So it's important to stain. Staining would also help you in decreasing the elasticity of the capsule. So once you stain that, you do the anterior rhexis. It's difficult in these cases. This child has had multiple surgeries, like he's had corneal transplant, he's had like a trap done as well. Twice a trap has been done. So a lot of inflammation and fibrosis is there, which has led to probably the anterior capsule is also fibrosed a bit. So one has to be careful because you don't need to have too small or too large a capsular rhexis in such cases. In Buphthalmos, try to keep the rhexis slightly smaller than a conventional rhexis because you have a 5.5 millimeter optic which has to go through the anterior capsular rhexis, but it should not prolapse out. Remember that. So the rhexis has to be slightly smaller as compared to a conventional rhexis. So once we've removed that, we do a primary posterior capsulotomy. You can see here a nice round posterior capsulotomy which has been done. So that is a must because otherwise it will lead to visual axis opacification, and which we don't want. And if the child is uncooperative for a YAG or something, you will have to again take him into the operation theater. So now when you have a bag with an posterior rhexis and a bag which is larger probably, then there's a chances that the IOL might move a bit in the bag. It would not exactly fit into the bag. So do anterior vitrectomy. And then again, for the capture, you have to use a 3-piece IOL. And also in these cases where the bag is slightly larger, probably a single piece would not help you that much as compared to a 3-piece IOL. So once you put that IOL in the bags, because of the clarity of the cornea, it's not that clear here. What we did was the haptics were in the sulcus and the optic was in the bag. You can see here a diamond-shaped anterior rhexis, which is clear here. You can see here diamond-shaped and a posterior round rhexis. And a diamond shape, you can say an oval rhexis, which is same when you do a posterior optic capture. So this signifies that the IOL has been captured. And when you have a follow-up here, you can see here after a couple of months or so, this is again, you can see an oval anterior capsular rhexis and a nice round posterior capsular rhexis. So the IOL is fixed here. It won't move because it's locked by the anterior capsule, and you have a posterior opening which will help you decrease the visual axis opacification. So you could do posterior capture or an anterior capture in selected cases. So I would like to conclude here by saying that primary IOL implantation is a good option when considering pediatric cataract surgery. Should be avoided in selected cases, as I have just enumerated. Conventional placement of IOL in the bag has issues with VAO and secondary glaucoma. Refinements in techniques such as posterior optic capture have been shown to be better in terms of inflammation. The VO is almost the same. There was no cases of opacification of the visual axis in both these series. So it's in terms of inflammation, it is better. And anterior optic capture stabilizes the IOL in eyes with buphthalmos. So that's very important in these large eye. Bag in the lens is a promising technique, but is limited by its availability. Thank you so much.
Dr. Jaspreet, it was very nice presentation, and it was impressive to see that capture. That is the posterior capture, because not many people, ordinary capture where you place the IOL in the sulcus and optic in the bag. Usually most of the people do that. But to place the IOL, a posterior capture where you place the IOL in the bag and then capture it, that looks, I think, that gives equally good result as we do implantation of IOL in the capsular bag versus this almost equal PCO and no much inflammation, I think, in this procedure. Dr. Vasavada has also shown yesterday that it works very well.
Yeah, okay, sir. Thank you, sir. Yeah, sir, actually, yeah. So basically, Dr. Vasavada had done the first series, but that was using basically in eyes of different patients. So that could lead to a bias because every other eye would behave differently. So in our case, we had bilateral cases where this bias was taken care of. And yes, I mean, the thought is that in supposing in infants, the bag is so small. And that is why they're saying that don't put the IOL in the bag, probably because it might lead to some kind of a capsular fibrosis and shortening, and the haptics are overriding the IOL. Probably where we are putting the IOL is the Berger space. It's a space behind the posterior capsule, which is a fairly wide space. So if you prolapse the IOL there, probably those issues with the capsule being small or the bag being small are taken care of. The other thing is we are not doing a vitrectomy in these cases. So vitrectomy has been shown because in young children, what happens is it's an immature trabecular meshwork, and the amount of vitrectomy is correlates directly with, you can say, the glaucoma risk later on, because it removes the hypoxic environment. So probably we are avoiding that it's not a risk factor for an immature trabecular meshwork. The IOL is locked, so that's also very stable IOL. So probably these are some of the things, probably maybe have some, you can say, advantages over the conventional IOL, but yes, in our series, we found the results were the same.
So for the audience sake, sir, would you like to tell us if intraocular lens power has to be adjusted if we are doing an anterior or posterior optic capture?
Intraocular lens power adjustment would be just maybe 0.5 or 1 diopter, because it's a growing eye. You're going to have myopic shift and all these issues. So in an emmetropic eye, okay, fine, you would have all these problems. But yes, in a growing eye, probably that much amount of a dioptric shift probably won't have much of a difference later in life.
Any other question? So if no
Can I-
question, we can go for the last presentation, and then we will have more time for discussion. Can you see the slide, the shared slide?
No,
So we
sir.
can't see the slide.
So we can't see.
No,
No, sir, it's not visible.
no, now.
Sir, we can see your screen, but your slides are, it's showing your
So you have to go to PowerPoint.
browser,
Showing Zoom.
PowerPoint.
Yeah.
What is the issue? I don't know what.
Yes, it's visible
Yes,
now.
sir.
Now you can see the slide.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I will be speaking on surgical tips and tricks for complicated pediatric cataract surgery. It is well
Well,
said
sir,
that
excuse me, sir. I think this is a different presentation, probably. How does it start? This is because it has some background music in this.
yeah, background music is there, but this is the same. I think
Sir,
surgical
what is the title?
surgical tips and trick for complicated pediatric cataract surgery.
Sir, the first
I
slide.
guess the problem is that with this presentation and this slide, Dr. Jagat might have zoomed in the presentation. So if you could zoom it out and make it normal, that would be fine.
Sir, please share again, sir.
Yeah, I think we will share it again.
Yes, yes, sir. Now it's
Yes,
fine.
sir.
Absolutely.
Now it's
Now
fine.
It's fine.
Yes,
Perfect, sir. Perfect.
So that was a PGI presentation which we showed you.
Yeah, okay. This is surgical tips and tricks for complicated pediatric cataract. If we fail to prepare, then we should assume that you will prepare to fail. This is well said, because if you are not prepared, so you have to prepare every time. So for pediatric cataract surgery, you have to diagnose the case, then you have to plan the case. There may be several situations. You have to do some innovative surgical procedure. You have to execute the procedure, and after surgery, you have to follow up these patients because there may be several of the complicated situations which I am going to show, such as PHPV, double crystalline lens, microphthalmos, ophthalmos. So this is a case with posterior lenticonus. This is a 2-year-old child with lenticonus, and this is anterior continuous carolinear capsular axis. This is the removal of the cortex from the capsular bag. This came out to be, this was the posterior lenticonus. So in these patients, we have to do primary posterior capsulotomy and place the IOL in the capsular bag, and then remove whatever vitreous is there, and it is much more precisely removed by by triamcinolone injection into anterior chamber. Another situation, this is a 4-month-old child. This was 4 months in 2013. Now this child is more than 7 years. And here 2 continuous curvilinear capsulorhexis were done. A removal of the cortex from the capsular bag. And we implanted customized IOL because such a large IOL not available anywhere in the market. And both the haptics were implanted into bag. And this is the final picture. The child amblyopia therapy was initiated, and the child could see even the smallest object. So occlusion therapy is extremely important in these children. Then comes high corneal astigmatism with cataract. This is a child with zonular cataract. Marking was done and Callisto was used. Continuous curvilinear capsulorhexis. Removal of the cortex from the capsular bag. And then this toric IOL implanted in the capsular bag. So Callisto was used here, and it has to be perfect alignment in the axis. This is a perfect alignment, and then hydration of the section. This is another child, JIA, 14-year-old girl, and here synechotomy was done. Then Malyugin ring is placed. For adequate dilatation of the pupil. Staining make the axis easier, and then removal of the cortex from the bag, and then implantation of the IOL into capsular bag. Then removal of this Malyugin ring. And most of the time, or many times in uveitic patient, we do peripheral iodectomy. Here is another child, 4-year-old child with congenital lenticular coloboma. For stabilization of the bag, we made this flap, and synechotomy was done. Anterior continuous curvilinear capsulorhexis. And this is the capsular hooks which can be placed along the capsulorhexis. Then removal of the cortex from the capsular bag. And then passing of this polypropylene suture and single eyelet Sioni ring. And then we, in this case, implanted toric IOL. Then these hooks are removed, and it provided excellent centration of the IOL and good stability. And this is before and after surgery in the same case. This is another child where there was cataract, and a child already had glaucoma surgery with tube, this glaucoma drainage device much longer than required, and people was small. Maligning placed, removal of the cortex from the capsular bag, and then implantation of the IOL. Most of the time at present we place a single piece IOL, but many times 3-piece IOL. And then trimming of this tube, which was much longer than required. Removal of the viscoelastic substance from the anterior chamber and from behind the lens. This is a child with the hemorrhagic type of PHPV, and we can see the stalk also. The arexis has been done. Then cauterization of the vascularized membrane. Only way, not very common to find these hemorrhagic type of PHPV. A removal of this vascularized membrane after cauterization. We use these Utrata, a small vena scissor. Cauterization of the stalk, otherwise it may bleed. Cutting and removing it using vitrectomy cutter because there may be traction. Then placing the IOL, it has to be captured. But this is a simple capture done here. Removal of the viscoelastic, and these are some of the other pictures showing where we have done cataract surgery in patients with PHPV. So this is in short, we have made the presentation on managing complicated pediatric cataract.
That was, sir, too good. I mean, these complex cases need probably a surgeon like you to have a good outcome, and because in children, as such, they are prone to so much inflammation, and with these complications coming up, you really need really expertise in dealing with these such cases, as every step is different. Like you showed the posterior fetal, the persistent fetal vasculature, where you need endocautery along with, and how the plaque has to be taken out carefully. Otherwise, they could be just bleeding inside the eye, and that would be the end of the surgery. So, I mean, those things have to be kept in mind, and probably your experience, like experienced surgeon like you, probably should be doing these cases rather than people outside when they need to refer these cases, and so that they are managed properly, because the child has to grow. I mean, he has so much life to live ahead, and just one small, you can say, complicated things can ruin his vision for life. So probably these things have to be managed at tertiary care centers.
I fully agree with you that these children, whether it is a simple pediatric cataract surgery or whether it is a complicated pediatric surgery, it should be managed by the person who has done training or who has experience. Training means who has worked with the trained ophthalmologist who is having experience of doing pediatric cataract surgery for a long time. And it is not that anybody do these complicated cases, because even in simple cases, there may be a lot of complication. So why not in other? There is a question from the audience that why not posterior optic capture in ophthalmos, other indication for anterior optic capture, or I think this means that whether we can, I think this is a very good idea, very good question, Dr. Jaspreet, because you showed that is in a normal child, which you showed. But this question is excellent question, that why not to do posterior capture? If suppose we have made a good rhexis and posterior capsulotomy, we place in the bag IOL, 3-phase IOL, and then do the posterior capture. So I feel this is an excellent question, and this can be possibility. But what you have to say about it?
Sir, no doubt. I mean, this is there is a possibility, and obviously in these eyes, you perform a capture or anterior or posterior. Basically, the issues are that we don't have a customized IOL for these big eyes. These IOLs are like obviously adult IOLs with a you can say a particular size, and placing them in the bag could lead to some amount of you can say decentration because of the large elastic bag. But yes, in posterior optic capture is no doubt a possibility, but in patients with ophthalmos, you have to be careful because your bag is big. If you place the haptics there and you have a posterior rhexis, which is you can say a fairly large rhexis, there is a chances of slippage. The option what we've done recently is what we did was that we put the haptics in the sulcus and prolapsed the optic behind the posterior capsule, with the result that nothing was in the bag. So the IOL was locked with the haptics in the sulcus and the optic behind the posterior capsule, so that it's locked, it's stable, and the risk of visual axis opacification is also minimal because your bags are sealed. There is nothing in the bag. So that is a reasonable option. But haptics in the bag and optic going behind the posterior capsule is risky in these children.
I also feel so that the posterior capture is a possibility in other cases, because in those cases where we do the posterior capture, we make the larger rhexis. And here, if in ophthalmos we make larger rhexis, and if we fail to capture, then we may not be even able to do that what we are doing anterior capture. So, but question is good anyway. We for customized IOL or for other, it may be possibility, but thought provided is good in this question.
I think Sabrina, you have some comments on this. You've recently probably done.
So yes, we were discussing it that day that whether we should do a posterior capture in ophthalmos, because the chamber sometimes is so cavernous that, you know, the case that I discussed with Dr. Jaspreet, I couldn't even do an anterior capture because I was capturing it and it kept on prolapsing into the sulcus. So probably in an older child where you think the bag dimensions are okay, then there is a possibility that you can put it in the bag where you do not require a posterior, primary posterior capsulorhexis. Because primary posterior capsulorhexis in these children will also lead to a decentration, might also lead to a decentration, which we observed in the younger kids that we did. So that's
I think so. The exercise is very important for an anterior capture. I mean, you should not prolapse out of the bag when you're doing anterior capture. So these are some of the things which we should be careful. Even for a posterior capture, I mean, there have been cases where my rhexis was just too big, and so I didn't do a vitrectomy. So the IOL came back in the bag, and then I had to do a vitrectomy because it was prolapsing. So the IOL had to be in the bag because of a large posterior rhexis. So our exercise is important, and you have to basically gauge your size based on what type of where do you wish to implant the IOL.
So we have now we have an open discussion because we are finished with the presentations. Among our panelists, you have explanted IOL, whether what causes, whether it is due to opacification, but I'm asking about children. In the adult, we have explanted a lot of IOL.
Yes, sir. Explantation, yes, I have had a few cases. One was I had to do it immediately, maybe in a week's time, because I had an unexpectedly high myopic eye suddenly. Probably the biometry went wrong somewhere. So that had to be explanted. So posterior, I had done a posterior rhexis. The IOL was fortunately in the bag. So, and it was a 3-piece IOL, so I could implant it, explant it. Had to cut it and explant it, but yes, these surprises sometimes come up. The commoner indication is when you have a large myopic shift. Now this lady was like 20, 22 years and had an IOL implantation at maybe a younger age group. So she was like -10, -12 in both the eyes. So I did one and then the other one. But yes, there's a lot of fibrosis when you are explanting these IOLs at maybe after 10 or more years of surgery. So it sometimes not possible to implant another IOL in the bag. You might have to just leave it in the sulcus. I tried to do a capture, but these they have such fibrotic margins that it would end up in a tear. So probably that is not a very safe option. But these were some of the indications for which I had to explant the IOL, but no case of opacification of the optic. I did not have one probably in these cases.
So we
Yeah,
have
surely,
one-
Dr. Parul want to say
Yes.
something. Yeah.
So we have experienced one child with the inbuilt opacification of the optic recently, and we are planning to explant that IOL. We initially thought that was a posterior capsular opacification, but on table we realized that the material was inside the IOL. So probably that was the hydrophilic IOL which was used from outside. So we are planning to explant that.
Yeah, that child we have documented, and same child where there are some vacuoles in the anterior surface almost all over. And these are absolutely round type of this we have documented, but this appears to be hydrophilic IOL, not hydrophobic acrylic IOL.
Yes,
Beside, I think in myopic shift, we have I have seen my own operated cases, several of them, dozens of them, which I have done IOL exchange. And that is one very, very important indication for explantation and replacement. But this opacification is another one.
So when you do
So
when you carry on, I can ask.
I was just commenting on this fact. So there was a paper from LV Prasad which said that we could have calcium deposits. I mean, I have never seen it. Maybe with this patient that Dr. Parul is talking about, we can do a analysis of what substance we saw, and probably hydrophilic IOLs are the ones which are most prone to these kind of. I haven't seen any deposits or any calcium deposits as such. IOL in I mean on a pediatric eye. That's all I wanted to comment.
So yeah, electron microscopy would be very helpful if you can get this the explanted IOL, no doubt. Sir, which IOL do you implant during the exchange? Like what are these IOLs which you have explanted? Were they single piece or 3-piece?
Actually, the IOL explanted, majority of them, they are the 3-piece IOL, which were done about say 20 years or 15 years back. They have undergone, some of them, high myopia, now -8, -9. So we have to replace them. And these majority of them are 3-piece IOL. And only very few of them are single-piece IOL. Majority, 90% are 3-piece IOL. And while we replace them, we mostly, by and large, we have replaced them with the 3-piece IOL. That is hydrophobic acrylic IOL. Because what happens that their bag may be so adhered that you have almost out of 10, you have 3 to 4 chances of implanting IOL into bag. Majority, 50-60%, you can place them into sulcus. What is your experience?
Yes, sir. I mean, obviously in the recent case which I did, the bilateral case, probably in one eye I could implant it in the bag, but in the other eye I had to put the IOL in the sulcus. I mean, it was such a fibrotic sealed bag. There was difficulty even explanting the IOL that time. So so it was getting complicated. So I had to just put it in the sulcus. Some of the IOLs, I mean, there has been a recent, I think one of the discussions only that they have observed glistenings on the IOL. I mean, small little opacifications, which maybe the vision no doubt remains the same, but there's an issue coming up with probably the glare and the contrast sensitivity in these children. So I think somebody would be coming out with that paper soon, and probably that might also need, with if these issues are coming up, whether to explant such IOLs or whether to leave them there, because what effect they can have on the long-term contrast sensitivity of the children would be something we need to see.
Perhaps we have now machines, better machines to see these higher order abrasions. That's why these glistening effects, because now we have those things also. So long term, people have reported more of these abrasions also with some kind of IOLs. Even one paper was talking about that it is more in single piece IOLs. So I don't know if it was like a sponsored study. So we have to see long term whether actually the glistening effects, how do we compare it with the.
Need more evidence for that. That's why to compare different IOLs.
Sir, I have a question that maybe Dr. Parul is because actively doing this also. I think what do we prefer as a post-op regime? Do we give? Do you like to give a subconjunctival injection or an intracameral steroid or in the infusion fluid? So what do you think the early post-operative, because that causes a lot of inflammation in these eyes. So what is your regime that you follow?
We prefer to use intracameral triamcinolone or dexamethasone. And for triamcinolone, we initially used to wash it out, but now we keep around 1.25 microgram of triamcinolone in the anterior chamber after the last step. So that is the last step. And for dexamethasone, we keep around 4 units of intracameral dexamethasone. And there is no difference in the corneal clarity. There's no haze whatsoever noticed post-op, and the inflammation is markedly decreased. So that is giving us good results.
There is a question from the audience. I think we will like to answer that because this question is in cases of uveitic cataract, whether the size of the anterior rhexis matters. Very good question again. Because if we do small rhexis in, it has to be appropriate size rhexis. It should not be a small rhexis, particularly in uveitis, because there are much more chances of thickening and phimosis of that rhexis margin, and it become further small. So it should be adequate size. So it means almost 5.5 to 6 millimeter rhexis. Ideally, most of the time we do about 5 to 5.5 millimeter. So it should not be smaller. If smaller we do, there may be much more chances of further contraction and thickening of the anterior rhexis 360 degree. That is what we have seen. So adequate size is very, very important. I think we have only just 2 minutes. Any one person, then we have to finish our instruction course.
So
Yes, yeah, go ahead.
So just I was thinking that multifocal IOLs, maybe we can cover that if you have experience, because you have experience with multifocal IOLs. What age you think we can implant in children?
I think this is again a area where I think very, very selectively we can select these children for multifocal IOL. We have previously, now at present, even Panoptic, even we have Symphony IOL we have implanted, and we are having follow-up of these children. So these are the children who should be ideally more than 6 years or so. Because still we have to adjust the IOL power because in the younger children you can't implant these IOL, and whatever that our study which is published that shows that almost 2/3 of them, they did not require, they could do without glasses, but still I think 35% or so. But I think their long-term follow-up is what is the most important.
So these children did not have posterior capsulotomy, sir, more than 6 years?
Yeah, more than 6 years we have not done posterior capsulotomy because we considered that we can do their ND-YAG laser capsulotomy. They will invariably develop PCO. So I think with this we can because we have here it is showing 13 seconds or so. Yes. Or but otherwise in the there is a 2 minute time. I
think they.
So I think we can close down. I am thankful to Dr. Jaspreet Sukija, Dr. Parul Chawla, Dr. Savleen, and it is the instruction course where I think particularly Dr. Savleen was very instrumental, and she was behind me. Dr. Sahab, we have to do this pediatric cataract because we have done several of the instruction course on the pediatric cataract, and this particularly this instruction course is from a beginner till I think many of the complicated cases and IOL power calculation, placement. So there is a variation, lot of. So I'm thankful to all of you, Dr. Jaspreet, Dr. Savleen, Dr. Parul, for your contribution into this instruction course. With this, we will close the instruction course.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you,
Thank you
sir.
so much, sir. Thank you.
All right, with this, a big thank you to Dr. Jagatram for conducting the session and finishing it on time so we can hand over the session to our next speakers on time. A big thank you and congratulations to all the speaker. Hope to see you soon in real world and non virtual world for the next conference. Thank you so much. And
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you so much. It was timely finished.